But we start this hour in the Middle East, and the World Health Organization's chief has said that Gaza is suffering a man-made mass starvation caused by a blockade on aid going into the enclave. His comments come as more than 100 aid agencies warned of hunger in Gaza, while tons of food, clean water and medical supplies sit untouched just outside of the territory. Gaza's food stocks have run out. Israel, which cut off supplies to Gaza in March during its war with Hamas, lifted the blockade in May, but with strict restrictions. Israel says these controls are to prevent aid from falling into the hands of Hamas. Israel has also blamed Hamas for the suffering of Gaza's 2.2 million people. The WHO reported that at least 21 children have died from malnutrition this year, though the actual number is potentially higher. Meanwhile, Hamas has submitted its response to an Israeli proposal for a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza, following over 2 weeks of indirect talks in Qatar. The response reportedly includes amendments related to aid delivery, Israeli military withdrawals and guarantees for a permanent end to the war. The talks have dragged on for more than 2 weeks without a breakthrough, with each side blaming the other for refusing to budge on key demands. For Israel, dismantling Hamas's military and governing capabilities is a non-negotiable, while Hamas continues to demand firm guarantees on a lasting truce, a full withdrawal of Israeli troops and the free flow of aid into Gaza. While joining us to discuss these latest developments, Jim Rice, Professor of International Law, who's joining us from Vigan in the Philippines. Jim, as always, it is a pleasure to have you on the programme. A couple of parts that we need to dissect here. First, let's look at the World Health Organization's comments talking about man-made mass starvations in the face of more than 100 charities, of course, calling out the current situation. Can I get your initial thoughts on this response from the WHO and whether you think it will make a difference to the way that Israel are currently allowing aid into the enclave?
Thanks for having me on, Joshua. Well, my reaction is one of outrage and anger and sorrow. We don't have to look only to the World Health Organization. We can also look at the recent report by Amnesty International and another report by Human Rights Watch, all of which are pointing to a growing genocide in Gaza. And of course, it's man-made. It's been inflicted by the Israeli government and Netanyahu's rule on the innocent women and children of Gaza, who are now paying the price of other nations' just gross inhumanity. I have a lot to say on this. Please give me a follow-up.
Yes, absolutely. Of course I will, Jim. And I want to look at reports of the deaths now due to acute hunger and starvation, numbers of people, but also children dying because of starvation. The situation is a murky one, of course. The amount of reporting that takes place in Gaza is limited. A blockade from Israel on international journalists verifying much of this data that's coming from Hamas-run authorities. But clearly there is a consensus among many NGOs that the situation is deteriorating and it is a humanitarian crisis.
Basically, I could go on, having taught international law for many years, I can go on and tell your viewers how this is in breach of principles of humanitarian law and the laws of armed conflict. But I think your viewers already know this. I'm just sick and tired of going on and talking about this again and again and again, and seemingly in a vacuum. And I'm really reminded of in 1971, in the conflict in the Bangladesh crisis, in which children were also starving during that time, in which there was a humanitarian movement coming together involving George Harrison and Ringo Starr and Bob Dylan and many others, who came together and broadened the awareness of the crisis and the tragedy going on in Bangladesh. This is another such time. We need to come out with alternative voices. We can't just talk about simply this is a war crime. We all know it is.
Jim, I want to quickly move on to the diplomacy ongoing as both sides do reportedly look towards a ceasefire over 2 weeks of discussions in Qatar, leading to a response from Hamas. But the situation seems to be the same. Hamas are looking for an immediate end to the war and a free movement, or at least improved movement, of aid into the enclave. Israel, of course, are sticking with what they want, which is disarmament of Hamas. They want, of course, to make sure that October the 7th can't happen again. With both sides so strong on their views and what they want in this ceasefire, how can international actors make sure that a ceasefire is made, even if that leads to compromises from both sides?
Well, regardless of the wishes of the IDF or the wishes of Hamas, the fact of the matter is that innocents, children and women and non-combatants in Gaza should not be subjected to famine, should not be subjected to this collective punishment that's going on. Obviously, diplomacy needs to happen, and equally obviously, it hasn't been happening. So Hamas isn't budging, Israel isn't budging. Netanyahu wants this war to continue, and meanwhile, the people of Gaza just continue to die.
Jim Rice, thank you ever so much for joining us to discuss the ongoing situation in Gaza and the diplomacy surrounding it here on NewsX World. We will bring you all of those updates on both situations as we get them. But we now move over to Europe, and Ukraine has proposed